Let's Get To presents Go Go Astros, a focus on H-Town hardball.
And we're back for a new Go Go Astros. This is our World Series prediction show. Go Go Astros is part of the Twitchy Dolphin Media Network and the Let's Get To Sports channel. And now we're excited to hand the show over. You know him, you love him, Mr. Brian Arbor.
Thank you, James, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. And we're actually really excited today because we're joined by a special guest today. We have Sam Blum with us. Sam is the athletics beat writer for the Angels, but the reason we asked him on here is because he is serving as the substitute beat reporter for the Astros during the playoffs. So, Sam, I think that gives you a real interesting perspective on the Astros because unlike national guys who pop in for one game every once in a while, the Astros 18 times this season from Anaheim. What sort of impressions did you form? What sort of impressions are there in Anaheim of the Astros?
Well, I mean, I think, obviously you
outside of trash cans.
Yeah, that's obviously part of it. If the Astros come and play in Anaheim, they get, at least certain players get booed pretty heavily like they do everywhere. But I mean, I think when you watch the Astros play, it was funny at the beginning of the season, Joe Madden, after the first series where the Astros won 3 out of 4 in Anaheim, he said that he thought the Angels were close to the Astros. And I remember sitting there and thinking, okay, well, that's wrong.
We all enjoyed that quote all season long, really.
Well, I mean, it was an unbelievably, misguided. And listen, I understand at the beginning of the year wanting some optimism and feeling like you've grown. And I also think maybe coming into the year, people thought the Astros, especially with Correa leaving, maybe they had taken some step back, and it's hard to predict just certainly how good they would be. But, I think when you watch them play, you shouldn't be surprised by the fact that it's kind of just transitions from one good team to the next, whether the same players come back or, new players kind of step in. It's just kind of been the way they've operated now for, the better part of a decade, really. So from my perspective, I think they're always going to be the class until they're not of that division. And whenever you see them play, I mean, I would say the Astros Angel series from July 1st to July 3rd, which I'm sure some Astros fans will remember with certain glee, was probably the worst series I saw the Angels play ever. I mean, really, it was a really bad series for them. They struck out 48 times in 3 games, which was a record for them. I think not for them. I think it was a 3-game series record.
It was a Yankees-like total.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, honestly, I haven't watched the last few days. It was very similar. But it was, it was just like a total beatdown. And I remember thinking, man, if it wasn't obvious these teams aren't anywhere near each other before, then you see it in that series play out where it was like 9-1, 9-1, and then like I think 3-2 there, or 4-2, they had a walk-off, something like that. Payne hit a walk-off homer. And that was the game they struck out 20 times. So it was just such a huge difference. And I think that's kind of the way this is with the rest of the division too. I mean, the Mariners are definitely closer. I think the Rangers are getting closer, but it's always going to be that difference. And when you watch the Astros play, I think you realize why it's kind of like this. It's top down. It's the fact that they have a good system that produces players when others leave. It's the fact that they, do their due diligence and who they bring in as free agents. And it just kind of, and then I think it's the veteran leadership that's obviously kind of been there and consistently, brought up those other players in a way that's, made this team kind of click throughout the whole stretch that they've been on. So yeah, they're the best team in the American League, probably the best team in baseball. I mean, I think you could argue the Dodgers winning 111 games are certainly close, but it's from my perspective over the course of, this amount of time, they've proven themselves to be the best.
Yeah. I mean, I always feel like we get this take every playoffs where, national guys who are well aware the Astros are good, but they watch them in person for a couple games in a row and are reminded that no, they're even better than I had remembered.
Yeah.
And I think we've sort of seen that a lot here, particularly this playoff, but I don't think that's new, that this is, a highly run professional team, and, they do lots of stuff really well.
Yeah. And I think it just is like, okay, well, you could bring in a new GM and you could bring in listen, and those people are important. I mean, obviously having James Click, I think he's been a solid GM. I mean, you can't argue with the results. Dusty Baker, again, he's been to the postseason 8 straight years, and that's dating back for quite a while because he's had some breaks in between. So these guys they're bringing in the right people to kind of lead. And I think it's not just the very, very top. In order to have a successful operation, you need to have infrastructure. I mean, when I see the Angels, why do they fail? It's not because Shohei and Mike Trout are bad. It's because the infrastructure is really bad. It's because they don't have the right people in their development system. They don't have enough. They don't treat their minor leaguers well enough. They don't treat their alumni well enough. Those things are important. And so when you do all those things correctly, you see these things pay off, and you get prospects that weren't prospects that end up being really good. And I think that's how teams that are and franchises and dynasties like the ones the Astros have are being built. And you wonder why a team like the Angels never makes the playoffs. Like that's the difference right there. And it's interesting to kind of see both sides of it.
I think to your point too, Sam, we're talking about 6 straight years in the ALCS, 3 with one GM and one manager, 3 with another GM and manager. You're right. I think it definitely is a big cultural change or cultural difference between the Astros and a lot of other teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, I think, listen, other teams do the right things. I mean, and I look at the Dodgers very similarly because they always have minor leaguers that come up, and then, you can flip them. Like who do they trade Zach McKinstry for? Like somebody who wasn't even a prospect for them that ended up just being a good player that you can get good players in return. Like that is how you build actually, that's how you build good teams. I mean, I know, obviously the Astros kind of fleeced the Dodgers for one of their best players.
Hey, they got Josh Fields. Fields, I mean, contributed to a World Series team.
That's
ours.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but that's got to be an all-time bad trade. But still, I mean, I still think that they can recover from that. They can recover from that. So that's what makes franchises good. You can make a mistake and still be good.
Yeah. And so you've gotten to, again, this October, follow the Astros on a daily basis, to watch them, to be in the clubhouse. What has stood out to you? What have you sort of learned being around them on a daily basis that's sort of different from your perspective as an outsider on them?
Well, yeah, it's so interesting to walk into a clubhouse and have everyone be happy. I mean, every day it's very different. I mean, I think it's just, even after they won like Game 3 against the Yankees, like they all had the same thing they were saying. And, I mean, as a reporter, sometimes, hey, that's a little bit annoying, but I also get that. Like, it's kind of, I'm not sure, they're kind of in unison, right? Like they kind of understand the task at hand. They understand that you have to win 4 games. There's nobody showboating. There's nobody kind of talking down about the opposition. And, even like after like they won that first game against the Mariners, Verlander made a point to say like, hey, like in this clubhouse after the game, like we gave a shout out to David Hensley for his walk to lead off or with 1 out of the 9th. I think that's the kind of stuff where, and I remember talking to Lance McCullers after they beat the Yankees, and he was like, when young players come here, they don't have to like prove themselves. They don't have to like earn their stripes here. And I think that's a good thing. I think there's too much of that in baseball where it's like, you got to earn your keep if you're there, you've earned it, in my opinion. If you're part of a major league team, you're the way that people foster good relationships in a clubhouse, I think, is if they feel like they're welcomed. And if that's the way the Astros teammates, older players, are treating their younger players, I think that's good.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can see particular evidence of that in Jeremy Pena, who we've commented on this show before. Carries himself, is a rookie, is 24, is babyface, but carries himself like a veteran.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel like a rookie and didn't hit like a rookie in the ALCS.
Brian, is this a part of the show where I remind our fans that I'm the one person who thought was nervous about him? Or can we skip that this time?
That's fine by me. We'll just get right over that. Andy, how much this is sort of, there's the talent aspect, right? They're really talented. We got a lot of talented players, but they really seem to have a good sort of, again, culture matters. It's hard for us to understand culture from the outside, but the product of it really seems to really stand out.
I think one of the things that Sam just brought up, which is interesting, and I don't know that I've given it a lot of thought, but the way you treat alumni. If you watch an Astros playoff game, you're going to see, well, up until recently, Nolan Ryan, but Craig Biggio, Jeff Bagwell, Josh Reddick has been at a couple of games. There have been Jose Cruz is at a lot of the games. Terry Poole shows up to games. And these guys that weren't all Hall of Famers. These are guys that are still welcomed in the clubhouse. They're welcome in the organization. I think Bagwell is still a special assistant to the GM, which means he, shows up and carries golf clubs or has somebody carry golf clubs for him in spring training and says, hey, hit the ball that way. But the fact that he is allowed to come talk to Jose Altuve when he's coming up, the fact that he is allowed to talk to Jeremy Pena and share his knowledge, that's a big deal. And if you don't have that kind of cultural follow through, the locker room, the weight room in Minute Maid Park is still Bagwell's weight room. That's for a 60-year-old franchise, having those little pieces of tradition that other franchises that are 120 years old can point to, that's where the Astros are starting to grow up as a franchise a little bit, which is weird to say, but something that's 60 years old, but in comparison. And I also think they make it a conscious effort. I think one of the things Dusty does really, really well, and I think we've all had our problems with some of the strategic things Dusty does, but from a player standpoint, he treats his guys like his family. He is tough when he needs to be tough with guys. He is soft when he needs to be soft with guys. And he knows that each player responds differently to their direction, I think. And I think that's really key for like a Jeremy Pena coming in, having to bear the weight of being the new Carlos Correa without really having to bear that weight.
Together and again, 7 straight wins in the postseason, which gets the Astros into the World Series facing the Phillies, who I guess I'm supposed to call the red hot Phillies because,
White hot.
They've won white hot, red hot. They're swinging hot bats, right? All these sort of terms to say they've won some games recently, and we didn't quite expect that. Objectively, the Astros are the hotter team, but that's less good of a narrative. As we sort of go away from the narrative and look at sort of the players, the Astros scored more runs and the Astros prevented more runs this season. They have a deeper rotation and they have a deeper bullpen. Their defense is a lot better than the Phillies. It's a lot of advantages that stack up on the Astros side. Do I have my orange colored glasses on when I say that? Or does this seem to be, hey, the Astros, are the better team walking into the series? I'll start, James, with you.
My orange colored glasses are on, but no, I look, actually, Sam, I know we don't know each other. I'm actually the pessimist of the group. My head says Astros in 5. My heart says Phillies in 9. I have to watch all of them. And then every commercial break will be that foul ball, the home run going off the foul ball. Like that's how I view the world. But one thing I found interesting, and I actually want Sam to address this when he talks about it, is I was watching, can't remember which Mike. Remember Mike and Mike? But they were talking about how the Phillies were ahead of everybody because they signed players without caring about defense, which to me is nuts. But Sam, if you could address that when you talk about the team. But yeah, I think Brian, everything lines up where the Astros are better, and I think clearly compared to last year, the Astros are in a better place starting the playoffs than they were last year with Verlander and McCullers out, and that having just won a very emotional series against the Red Sox. It does seem like, as much as you can in baseball, things are lining up the way the Astros want it.
Yeah. Sam, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that the Astros are by far the favorite here. It's the same thing. The Phillies would have been the huge underdog against the Cardinals and really every series. I think when you get to this point, a 7-game series is a good way to determine who's better, but it also, it leaves open a lot of chance. And, I don't think there's any way to know who's going to win this series up until when it happens. Obviously, like you said, the Astros games have been really close, but I don't necessarily think there's been a lot of, I don't think that they've been in any danger of really losing or being eliminated. I think there was a lot of daylight between the Yankees and Houston. And so even though the games were mostly 1 or 2 runs outside of game 3, it really wasn't a close series. And I don't even really think the games were that close. You saw the Yankees do things that Houston didn't do. There's reasons why they won the game, and it wasn't because 1 or 2 bad things happened here or there. So for me, not caring about defense for the Phillies, I don't know if that's helped them or if it's just kind of, I've watched enough Phillies games to feel like, man, that I'm surprised they're at this point, but they've got something kind of fun happening right now. So, it's certainly cool. And I think watching the way the Phillies fans have appreciated their team, and I think any baseball fan would understand why that's amazing. But yeah, I picked the Astros. I think Astros in 5 makes a lot of sense. I'd love to be able to fly home to California instead of having to go back, but we'll see. It's been a long month. But
I'm not the only one who wants to leave Philly for Southern California, though, Sam. Just letting you know, it's a universal feeling, I'm sure.
Well, Mike Trout certainly understands that. So, but yeah. So we'll see. I definitely think the Astros have the upper end, but when you get to this point of the season, it's there's a lot of things that kind of happen that you don't really predict.
Yeah. Andy, let's flip the question around. Where are the Phillies' advantages in this series?
The Phillies' advantages so far are that they're a 80-something win team from the NL East, facing a heavily favored Astros team in the World Series. And the last two times that has happened, that has not gone well for us. We can make fun of it all we want. We can bang on the media narrative, but they are hitting really, really well. They've got guys up and down their lineup, especially at the top of the lineup, that can put the ball over the fence in any park and change the complexion of a game. And so far in these playoffs, those guys come up in really big moments. So it hasn't just been Harrison Bader hitting a home run to lead off a game. And, we spotted the Yankees 3 runs. Let's just be honest. We got bored. Let's see how much of a lead we can give them before we just
like me and my grade point average in high school.
Let's just crush their spirits a little bit more by spotting a 3-run lead from there. I think the Phillies are a young, exciting team. I think some other things that work in their favor are that some of the guys we depend on so far in their careers haven't performed really well in the World Series. Justin Verlander being one of those. In his 7 games, he has a 5.68 ERA in World Series games. His strikeouts are down, his walks and hits are up. It's not a great combination. Yordan Alvarez disappeared in the playoffs last year after the ALCS. So in the World Series against the Braves, he was kind of a no-show. We don't really know what we're going to get with Jose Altuve, if I'm playing pessimist, because he was 0 for 25 before he went 3 for his last 7. So maybe he's coming around, maybe he's not. Kyle Tucker, outside of Seattle series, hasn't really shown up for anything other than catching a few fly balls. So there are some things that the Astros need to get better at. The good side for the Astros is that we don't need Justin Verlander to be dominant Justin Verlander. We just need to keep him in a game, keep us in a game, keep it close. Because we have so much bullpen depth, we have so much other pitching depth and I think that's why they're starting Nola against him and Wheeler against Fromber to try to get a split. That's the goal in it when you don't have home field advantages, to try to turn around 3 games at Philadelphia. So I'm wary from a historical standpoint. Somebody has now pointed out to me 4 times today, I'm in Seattle right now, that the only 2 other teams to sweep the division series and the championship series, I think the Rockies and the Reds, both lost the World Series. All of our negative stuff, all the reasons Philadelphia should feel good about themselves, are all historical, anecdotal things, but we've seen this play out. We should have beaten the Nationals. We certainly, if we were healthier, should have beaten the Braves. I do like how healthy we are. I do like that we've got guys that have room to improve, and we're not relying on somebody being white hot. We're not relying on Kyle Schwarber to hit out of his mind. But I think it's going to be a good series.
I think the other advantage the Phillies have is, I love Orbit, but the Fanatic, they win in mascot. The mascot
they'll probably bring Gritty out as well here, which can only exacerbate the.
Isn't Gritty a net negative though?
I mean, the Flyers haven't done well, I don't think, but then I don't follow hockey much. So, Sam, what do you see are some of the Phillies' advantages in the series? Is it just vibes?
I think, honestly, maybe. I mean, the way that they've hit is, been. I think I going into that last series, I would have predicted the Padres to win, but the Phillies just kept coming up with big hit after big hit, and it felt like they just really wrestle control of that series. And when you're doing that, and when you continue, vibes can carry you. They can carry you to a title. I mean, you've seen, like you just mentioned, the Braves last year. I mean, they did not have a great season. The Nationals, again, I mean, they almost lost in the wild card game that year that they won. So it's if you can have a moment where things just kind of click, that can carry you for 4 more games, 4 more wins. So it's, that might be enough. And I think that's a scary thought. I mean, you still have to get to this point. You have to win it. I think Dusty Baker probably, if you could have signed up for this, signed the dotted line for this chance to get a World Series ring, this would have been a great, he said the Phillies in the World Series, home field advantage. I think that would have been perfect. So this is a really good opportunity. I think the Phillies have an offense that's just, doing really well right now. I think that, Aaron Nola has the potential to go out there and have a really good start in game 1 and set the tone maybe. Zach Wheeler, what he's done in the postseason. And I think that's an advantageous position for him to maybe, get that extra day of rest and then have those 2 guys go in Houston. If you can get one of those games, that'll put him in a good position. So I think there's reason to be concerned for the Astros, but they still have the big advantage, and as Andy said, you don't need to have a great start. You just need to be able to get it to your bullpen, and the Astros bullpen, to me, that's the biggest difference with the Phillies and with any team that they'll face.
Yeah, it's very clear the Phillies, they've gotten really good production from the top couple guys in their bullpen and have no confidence in anybody else.
Yep.
And, they were kind of all in to win Game 5 with pushing Sir Anthony Dominguez and, their top relievers for sort of extra work, even though they were behind. And
they got lucky. I mean, I don't know what the Padres were doing down the stretch for some of those. Bunting, some of that stuff. It was like,
bunting with one out. What was that?
How do you not bring in Josh Hader?
Not bringing
Harper in that situation.
Yeah, I don't know what you're saving him for after you traded all those guys. And to me, it was. I mean, they kind of did it. They obviously earned that win, but I mean, there were certain decisions made by the Padres that really handed it to them in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it was lots of curious stuff and lots of home run hitting by the Phillies. I mean, to me, as I sort of think of the advantages, the one advantage that the Phillies might have is they have a deeper lineup than the Astros, assuming Uriel hits like he did in the regular season and not like he has in the playoffs. And if that's the case, they've got 4 big boppers in Schwarber, in Harper, in Rhys Hoskins, and again, if he plays better than the regular season, Nick Castellanos. But then you like your chances better with guys like Real Muto and Blum over sort of the 5th and 6th in the Astros order. So that seems to be one place where things can be deeper. On the other hand, Astros were second best in the majors at preventing home runs, and they just took the best home run hitting team in the majors and limited them to 3 solo home runs. And that was an absolute key to that series. They kept the Mariners off from hitting home runs. And so
I think the other thing, Brian, too, because it actually goes back to that defensive thing. The Astros don't strike out. They put the ball in play. The more you put the ball in play against a team that doesn't play defense, the more you're going to be able to manufacture runs, even if you are getting out homered.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And we saw that in Game 3, where, I mean, the Yankees have a really good defense. Their numbers wise right next to the Astros, but they had to put a weak defender in Giancarlo Stanton into left field. And he did not play the 2 balls into left field in the 3-run rally in Game 3 well, and it really helped the Astros salt that game away. I think, a better defensive left fielder, they'd have only scored 1 run in that inning. The Astros both were, fortunate for that, but also exploiting another team's weakness. And we'll see more of that here, where, Schwarber is a catcher and Castellanos is a meme generator as defenders, and that's an advantage for the Astros.
He's a meme generator in more than one way, too. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think that's. I mean, you talked about Game 3 of the LCS. Game 4 was the same thing. Torres to IKF missing that double play ball, even if it was just 1 out at second, that broke the Yankees back. That was, and the Astros continue to put pressure on teams to make the right plays. And unfortunately, against the Braves, that happened in 2020 against the Rays.
The Rays, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys were out of their minds catching the ball. But you have to play. If the Astros don't make mistakes, the Phillies will have to play a perfect series, and I mean perfect series, to win every game that they need to win. The odds of anybody doing that aren't great. Obviously, we've seen it happen, which, as an Astros fan, you just kind of, all right.
One of the things I was curious about, Sam, being like a sort of neutral observer, I saw it seems like it happened with the Mariners, and now it's happening with the Phillies, where it's like, go out there, give him hell, the vitriol from the ballpark. Do you think there's anything the Astros haven't already seen that Philly fans going to be able to bring for as long as we said the fact that Santa Claus won't be there and therefore throwing snowballs at him won't be a possibility?
I mean, normally I would say no, but this is Philadelphia we're talking about. So, I mean, you've seen some horror stories in the news about Philadelphia sports fans. They're great sports fans. It's not a discredit to them, but I think that some of the extremes there can be maybe really extreme. So maybe it might be a really incredible environment in a way that does not, even it might even rattle the Astros. I mean, it's tough. It's not going to be easy, but I think that if any team is capable of kind of putting that out of their minds, it's this one. They deal with this in the regular season. Like, it's probably not to this level, but Even like you say, go to Anaheim, you see it. A couple years ago, I saw them play in Los Angeles. I think it was like Max Scherzer's like first start with the Dodgers, and that was a crazy environment. And they're able to handle it. It's nothing for them. I mean, and they certainly had, like, you guys might hate me for this. I think they've earned some of those boos.
Oh,
Certainly.
sure. No,
yeah.
Yeah.
And I get why baseball fans don't like them. I certainly do. It's not my feeling necessarily, but I get why. I certainly don't blame people for not liking it. But it's also probably hardened them a little bit. And when you get to this point of the season, that's an advantage.
Yeah, no, it's certainly. Yeah, I mean, there is something of like, what are they going to say about him? I live outside of New York. I went to one of the games. I went to the Altuve birthday game last year where, I learned some new lyrics to Happy Birthday and got to watch Jose Altuve hit a 3-run home run to win that game. It's, again, maybe they are bothered. Maybe it matters they were able to play the way you would think they would. That.
I don't think Minute Maid Park's necessarily a difficult place to play for an opposing team, but you also, and I have not studied the Phillies roster up and down, so there may be a couple of exceptions to this. This is not a team coming into Minute Maid that has a wealth of World Series experience. And if you talk to players, as much as they want to say it's a game and we just want to play the game and it's not any different, it is different. There's a lot more emotions. These are guys that have dreamed of playing on the stage for most of their careers. You don't know how somebody's going to react. You don't know if Bryce Harper is going to somehow slug for 2,000 points versus striking out every time because he's pressing. I don't think it's the case, but you really don't know what's going to happen to these guys until they're in that pressure cooker. Nobody would have gone into that 2019 series and said Howie Kendrick is the hero for the Washington Nationals, and yet here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Kyle Schwarber was on the 2016 Cubs, but that's just about it among key players on the Phillies. Harper had never won a series before this year. JT Realmuto's in his first playoffs. Same with Rhys Hoskins. There's several of the longtime Phillies. Gene Segura played the most games in baseball, right, without being in the playoffs until he made the playoffs this year. The Astros had Jeremy Pena, Hector Neris, and I guess Rafael Montero in that situation, and that's about it. So is that an advantage? It doesn't hurt, right? How much of an advantage you'll be able to see, because it certainly hasn't affected the Phillies so far.
Well, and we've certainly been on the other side of it, where guys who hit really, really well in one series disappear in the next. Whatever those pressures are and whatever those reasons are, everything else.
Call that period, Sam, the 1990s.
And the 80s and the
80s.
And the 2000s.
Yeah.
But I don't think if the Astros have an advantage on everything else we've talked about, I do not think that the pitching staffs with St. Louis, with San Diego, and then the team in the middle that I'm forgetting now, that the Phillies had to face, have had pitching staffs at the level of what Houston has, man after man after man, when you're facing them, because we don't have a guy we're trying to hide and hope we don't have to pitch in the bullpen. We don't have a starter that we're trying to just get by on. I mean, unless you're going to count Justin Verlander.
This gives me a chance to plug the article. This gives me a chance to plug the article that Sam wrote today, which is how strong is the Astros bullpen? Here's the guys they're not using, which focus primarily on Ryan Stanek. But I think it sort of fits to the point. You're right. The Astros have this really impressive pitching depth, and they've been able to rely on that. And in some ways, it's made the job easy for Dusty Baker. He doesn't have to make a lot of controversial moves in the bullpen. It's just, I'll pitch this guy in this inning and this guy in this inning, and I don't have to worry about it.
And it helps if you have a starter that's typically going 5 or 6 at least, and then you have a lead and you can kind of set things up the way you want. I mean, I think sometimes where teams can get burned in like the Padres, I mean, you saw with Mike Clevenger having to go, you have to use some guys a little bit too much, a little too early. And then all of a sudden you're putting in some guy, like you said, that maybe you'd otherwise try to hide. And all of a sudden, even if you have a 4-0 lead, it doesn't mean anything. It's going to be one of those nights. And that happens in the playoffs, especially in these series. I mean, it's like the ALCS, it didn't really matter because they won in 4 games, but without that off day, it's not having that off day after Game 5, which they will have in the World Series. I mean, that's a big deal. And I think when you get to these parts of the postseason, the Astros are in great position having only played 7 games. You're not going to have to push Justin Verlander more than 2 more starts, Fromber more than 2 more starts, Javier in theory. I mean, honestly, I think I don't know if they put McCullers in a position where he has to pitch game 3 and 7. I think it's going to be an interesting decision. I mean, obviously you have the one extra off day, so it makes it a little easier, but I wonder how they're going to handle it given how good Javier has been. It's really just a matter of picking from your best, you have so many good options. How do you pick?
Yeah, and I think
also,
for that, I would want to go Javier just because he can bounce back for game 7 as opposed to McCullers, who dealt with that forearm strain. So it seems like that's the smarter play.
Well, and it literally, if Verlander stumbles or McCullers has a slow start, you've got Luis Garcia and Jose Urquidy just sitting there waiting to do something. Urquidy's thrown one inning this season so far. Garcia, as much as we grumbled about him in the regular season, was masterful against the Mariners in that 5-inning mop-up duty. Can you call it mop-up duty in an 18-inning game?
At what point did you hope the game was over in that 18-inning game? Sorry.
Honestly, I once it, you hope it's over in the first 9, but once it gets to like 13, you're like, let's just go all night here. I mean, I got nowhere to be. So it was, I loved that. It was great. I was hoping at least one more inning, so it's at a record, but once you get to that point of the night, it's just, you just go get some popcorn and sit there and wait for it to end.
Like all Astros fans, I was waiting for the 18th because the 18th is the inning where we really strike.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing about the Astros in that game was they could have gone long. They could have gone long. I mean, they had Garcia who was throwing like 98. I mean, I don't even know if he does that. Yep. So it was just like he was going, and then you had Urquidy, like you said. They may have had somebody else, I think.
Javier could have pitched. He just wasn't in the bullpen.
Yeah, exactly. So they really they could have kept going for quite a while. So it was that's kind of they're set up for it. It's fortunate for them.
Good. Well, I did want to take one opportunity here since, while there are 2 teams that are playing off over the next week here, there are 28 that are completely in the mode for next season, and that includes the team that Sam covers on a regular basis, the Angels, our division foe. Sam, my sort of interpretation of the Angels, signing Phil Nevin to a 1-year contract, to settling with Shohei Ohtani before arbitration, my sort of thought from the outside is they're just in a holding pattern until the sale of the team goes, and therefore they're not going to be really sort of pushing this offseason. Do you think that's accurate? Do you think that's inaccurate? What sort of context can you add to that?
I think that's 100% accurate. I think that, and I think it's a huge problem because they have a lot of money already tied up in next season. I mean, you mentioned Shohei for $30 million and Mike Trout for like 36 and Anthony Rendon for like 38, and so that's over like 120 something million bucks right there. And then you have a lot of guys who are hitting arbitration or elevating in arbitration who are going to cost more money than they already have. So if you're going to build on a team that won 73 games, you're going to that doesn't have a farm system that has a lot of guys ready to get called up. Like I said, you mentioned Jeremy Pena. Like, this is a good example of, well, okay, somebody left, you couldn't afford them, you didn't want to pay them. You have somebody else right there. This is not the facts of life for the Angels, and so they're going to have problems next year, I think, unless players really come out of nowhere to be good above replacement players for them. Otherwise, I think they're going to have another really bad losing season, especially with the ownership situation. Like, as you mentioned, 1-year contract. I mean, and good for Phil Nevin. I like Phil. I don't think he's as bad as his record maybe says he was. But at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think he would have been rehired had it not been for the situation they're in. And I don't necessarily think that you could ever get away with giving somebody a 1-year deal. And I'm sure that's why they didn't look elsewhere. Who are you going to convince? They want to have as many fixed, cheap, short-term costs as possible to entice an owner to come in, pay a record amount, and be able to formulate this franchise as they see fit. I think, and that's partly why they kept Ohtani. He's such a valuable asset for them. And from my perspective, when you keep someone like Ohtani, I mean, I think you could argue that was the right decision, but I don't think you can argue the reason was the right reason. The reason being an ownership change. You should be operating in the best interest of winning at all times. And I don't necessarily know that the Angels are. I don't necessarily know that Perry has all the resources he needs, or even the direction that he needs, or in the understanding of what the payroll will be. So it's just it's really complicated right now for this franchise, and I don't think they're going to be in a good position until the ownership situation is resolved.
Well, speaking of the complication, it was something that I think people noticed but didn't talk about, was the breaking of the lease with the stadium. Like, what is that about? I mean, is that another one of those things we should read into as far as it being about an ownership change?
I mean, I think there's some conspiracy theorists that could read between the lines on some of these things. I mean, obviously, like, that happens, and then he decides to sell the team a few months later. And, I mean, obviously that was something that involved the FBI and the mayor, basically possibly facing persecution, the mayor of Anaheim, for this, potentially allegedly quid pro quo deal of, them exchanging campaign funds for a good stadium deal. I mean, there's a lot of things happening that I think are very complicated that maybe your Astros listeners aren't totally aware of, but what's happened. Yeah, I think that's really connected. I mean, I don't think, and I also think, obviously the team's being sued for wrongful death because of the Tyler Skaggs, situation from several years ago. So there's a lot of things that are happening that I think maybe contributed to this decision kind of coming when it did. It's unfortunate for someone like Mike Trout and for Ivan Ohtani, who obviously put a lot into winning and who are really good players and who really, on any other team, I think would be playing in the postseason, maybe even playing in the World Series right now. But they're on the Angels, and so they're not.
I have great affection for Mike Trout, both as a player and just, I think he seems to be a good enough dude.
He is, yeah.
And I realize part of that is because I respect his talent, and part of that is he doesn't hurt my team, so he can hit home runs against them, and I don't have to change my opinion on it, which is really an indictment of the Angels instead of the Angels front office.
I'd be happy to trade Jake Myers to the Angels for. I mean, if they're just looking for a trade partner, we have a center fielder who we're not even playing. I mean, don't look at the stats. He looked very nice in Minute Maid Park. I'm just saying.
I mean, he's a great
28
player.
other teams who agree with you, Andy.
And the other with Mike Trout, I mean, he's had some injury things the last couple of years, and he's on the wrong side of 30 at this point, or the older side of 30. So it's, and he's got like another 8 or 9 years, I think, on his deal. So it's I mean, these are things that are difficult. These are things that are going to come to a head at some point fairly soon. And I think that the Angels are just not in a position to deal with it, and they're not they're not actively working to deal with it, and that's where their problems are.
Yeah, and we will see what the new ownership, whenever that gets in place, what their attitude is on Trout and possibly Ohtani, depending on how long this takes, because Ohtani will be a free agent after the 2023 season, and will be maybe a less interesting season on the field in Anaheim, but a very interesting season off the field. But let's focus on the field here as Astros fans, because the World Series starts on Friday. 7:03 Central Time was the first pitch for each of the games here. So plan your life accordingly. James, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Well, first of all, we want to thank Sam for jumping on. Sam, we'll put all your how to follow you information on the bottom of this episode so people can find you on social media. And thanks for doing such a great job covering us. Andy was going to ask a sarcastic question about why the Athletic hates you.
I just wanted to thank you, because for a couple of months I figured the Athletic just forgot we existed, and then all of a sudden we got articles again. So,
I do have thoughts, but probably should save them.
Yeah, and we're actually we're all actually pretty good friends with Jake Kaplan, so we told him we were going to tease that very same question. But again, Sam, thanks for coming on. We will put this your follow stuff. Until then, until next time, again, we will be coming to you right after every single World Series game, and should the good one happen, we'll be live immediately afterwards. Until then, Brian, Andy, go Stros.
Hey, we're in the World Series again because our team's really good again. Go Stros.
I'm still rooting for the Powder Blues versus Rainbow Guts. Go Stros.